and they will sell anyone any information about anyone. So the way that these nursing apps work is before you're offered a shift, the app will go and connect to a data broker and look up your credit. And if you're carrying a lot of credit card debt, and especially if it's delinquent, you get offered a lower wage, right? Because you're probably more economically desperate. What that means is that the nurse who's inserting your catheter probably drove Uber till midnight the night before and then skipped breakfast to make rent because their wages are being forced down, right? And so keeping people in that desperation equilibrium, it's the kind of thing that you can automate well with technologies that these days we call AI. A few years ago we called machine learning. It's just, it's a pretty straightforward algorithm, but it's like the kind of thing that AI is pretty good at. Mostly, I'm not as worried about AI as a technology because it's such a disgusting investment bubble that is going to burst and take the economy with it.
Welcome to the Smart Cookies podcast. I'm here with Cory Doctorow, journalist, science fiction writer, and author of the amazing book, Enshitification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. Cory, welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
As a big believer in grand openings, I'm just going to go for it. Why does the internet suck so bad right now?
Well, I think it's because we used to have constraints that punished companies that did bad things, and we got rid of those constraints. So now whenever there's an individual who's in a decision-making position who has a bad idea, there's nothing to stop them doing it. And whenever there's a factional dispute within a company where some people want to advocate for users of the platform and other people want to advocate for the shareholders at the expense of those users, the people advocating for the shareholders always win, because the argument is always like, it would be icky to rip people off in that way, and not we would hurt if we rip people off that way. We'd lose workers, or we'd be fined, or our competitors would take us over, or people would make new technology that would make our technology obsolete.
So in short, could we just say this is capitalism then? Or is it a tad more complicated than that?
Well, I'm not like the world's greatest true believer in capitalism, but I think that it's unequivocal that we used to have a different kind of capitalism. The platforms used to be a lot better, and now they're a lot worse. I'm not saying that the best way to get platforms is to just use markets to get them. But if you are going to use markets to decide how platforms behave, then you need to make those markets contestable. You need to make the firms small enough to regulate. You need to invigorate labor power so that workers can stick up for their users. And you need to make sure that the regulatory environment doesn't stop people from making technologies that make their lives better. Because right now what we have is a situation where platforms can exploit the flexibility of digital tools to change the deal on you every time you use them. So prices can change, costs can change, search rankings and other aspects can change in a way to shift value away from you and to the platform. But if you want to use technology, right, if you want to reverse engineer the app so that you and everyone who's gig working near you can refuse all lowball offers and force the wage up, or if you want to reverse engineer the app so that everyone you know who's on Prime can see whether Prime users are being charged extra because Amazon knows that most people with Prime don't shop around, or if you want to reverse engineer the app so that you can take your ebooks and audiobooks around with you, or if you want to reverse engineer your printer so that you can use third-party ink in it and not use the original HP ink, which is $10,000 a gallon. It's the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian. It would be cheaper to print your grocery list with the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion, right? If you wanted to change that technology, that would be within your remit. That would be a matter between you, your devices, and maybe a company or an individual who is doing the technology work that you hope to avail yourself of. And the manufacturer wouldn't get to step in and ask the government to prosecute people who made your technology better. So that we would, rather than having a situation where we are defenseless and they can do whatever they want with the technology, we'd have a situation where they were constrained and we could use our technology in the ways that benefited us.
All right. I thought maybe it's my rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, but I remember the time of like message boards, straightforward ad-free websites, and customized MySpace profiles extremely fondly. Fast forward then to a couple of decades, and I have to battle through mountains of AI slop and shitty ads, and then go through like 3 verification processes to figure out which of the 12 streaming platforms I have to be subscribed to if I want to watch a shitty Steven Seagal movie on a Friday night. So you're telling me it's about the fact that everything's been so monopolized, and the fact that we're unable to tweak technology anymore that's causing
Yeah.
my
Well,
experience on the internet
let's
today.
concretize that just a bit here, right?
Yeah.
So, you have a company, Google, right? Obviously, a very important, structurally important internet company. Um, they have had one successful internal product to speak of and it was a product from the previous millennium. It was a search engine. It was really good when they launched it 27 years ago. Virtually everything they've made in-house since has been a flop, and almost all their successes,
Damn. Yeah. Shots
mobile
fired.
video. Well,
Yeah.
it's just empirically true. Mobile video, ad tech, server management, docs, collaboration. Those are all other people's companies they bought and operationalized. They are ops people, not innovators. And look, I'm an ex-ops guy. That's fine. But their story is we are innovators. And the thing is that under the letter of antitrust law, of competition law, that kind of acquisition is unlawful, right? When you're acquiring a competitor to reduce competition, that is an unlawful acquisition. And yet the DOJ, the FTC, under multiple presidents, Democrat and Republican, just waved through all those mergers. And so Google was able to build up quite a giant war chest. And they started to buy all the shelf space. So they bribed Apple more than $20 billion a year not to make a competing search engine. They bought every operating system, every browser, every carrier, every platform, so that if there was ever a search box in front of you, it was wired into Google's server, which meant that nobody really invested in a rival search engine except for Microsoft, which just rolled it out with its OS. And as a result, they became not just too big to fail and too big to jail, they became too big to care. So in 2019, when the DOJ sued Google for antitrust violations, they published a lot of memos from Google that they'd received through discovery. And one set of those memos that Ed Zitron from the Where's Your Red At newsletter analyzed in depth talks about how Google deliberately decided to Enshitify its service. So in 2019, Google had hit a wall on search growth because they had 90% market share. So people with 90% market share don't grow, right? You could raise 1 billion humans to maturity and make them Google customers, which is what Google Classroom is, but it takes like 18 years, right? And so they needed some other way to goose revenue. And you have this epic battle between two Google executives, and you can see it play out in the emails and the memos. You have one guy called Prabhakar Raghavan, who's the revenue guy for Google Search. He's an ex-McKinsey guy, came from Yahoo. And you have another guy called Ben Gomes, who's the tech guy for Google Search. And he has been with Google since the earliest days. He was their data center guy. He started with one server under a desk and built out the global network of data centers and eventually became their search tech guy. And so Prabhakar Raghavan's got this great idea. He says, what if we made search worse? Right? If we turn off the things that let you one-shot a search, right? Like spell checking and this thing called query stemming, where like if you search for pants, they do another search for trousers in the background. Context clues, like if there's a monkey that got loose on a highway and you search for a monkey, it like elevates those queries more highly because everyone's searching for that. And that's the thing they're looking for. All the stuff that kind of made Google magic and let them one-shot those queries. We just turn all that off. Now you got to search 2-3 times before you find the thing you're looking at. Well, each time you search, that's another chance to show you an ad. And so here you've got, these two ideas. And if Google were in a competitive environment, if Google was worried about regulators, if Google was worried about their employees, because remember, Google hired these brilliant technologists, a significant plurality of all the top PhDs from every major university in the world, they would be in a position where this would be unthinkable. But by the time 2019 rolls around, they're already getting to the point where they're thinking they've got enough workers. They don't have to be quite so deferential to them. Sure, they'll keep the free kombucha and the massages and the ball pit and stuff, but let them get angry about this stuff. They're not worried about competitors, obviously. They're not worried about regulators for good reason. I mean, for one thing, Google's been invading our privacy since, the early 2000s with impunity, because the last time America got a new consumer privacy law was in 1988 when Ronald Reagan signed a law that bans video store clerks from revealing your video rental history. That's the last technological privacy threat that Congress has defended us against as consumers. And so they're not worried about regulators either. So they're sitting there completely unrestrained. You have these two factions, and you can imagine those factions have been at Google since the early years. I mean, I know people who went to Google who were just scumbags. and who were just greedy assholes. But they lost their arguments for the most part for a couple of decades. And now they start winning the arguments, right? The discipline, the fear of competitors, of workers, of interoperable technology, of regulators, that's gone away. And so when the clash occurs, it cashes out in favor of a shittier service. And that's enshitification. And it's not caused by greed, because we didn't invent greed in the late 2010s. And it's not caused by VC, because VC companies backed Google when it was good. And it's not caused by laziness. It's not because you weren't paying for the product, so you were the product. I mean, Apple, when they turned off spying for Facebook, they turned on spying for Apple to run their own ad network with no opt-out. You can pay for the product, you cannot pay for the product. If the company can make you the product, you're going to be the product, right? So it's not about a customer reward perk. It's about discipline. It's about fear. And so you take away all the fear, take away all the discipline, enshitification follows like night follows day.
So it's like, we have a superior product. We've conquered the globe. We have an idea what to do next. Let's make it a bit shitty. That's almost like an ingenious idea in a sort of psychopathic Lex Luthor sort of way. Because, yeah, what else can you do? But by the way, you write that enshitification is a 3-stage process. Could you break down this process?
Sure.
Apparently
I can use Facebook as an example here.
Yeah. An example would be amazing.
In stage 1 of enshitification, you have platforms being good to their end users and at the same time locking end users in. So platform, it's a kind of company that mediates between 2 or more groups of users, right? So in the case of Facebook, the end users were us. People who wanted to find out what other people were saying. And Facebook pitched people who were already social media users in 2006. This is when they opened up to the general public and dropped the requirement that you have a .edu address and said anyone can join Facebook. And they said, hey, sure, you've got an account on MySpace, but obviously MySpace is owned by this evil crapulent senescent Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, and he's spying on you with every hour that God sends. Come to Facebook. We will never spy on you at Facebook, and we will only show you the things that you ask to see. So pick your follows. We'll show you what they post. So users pile in and they lock themselves in. And there's a lot of different ways that platforms can lock us in. Amazon gets us to pay for a year's shipping in advance, so it'd be dumb to shop anywhere else because we've already paid for the shipping. Apple locks you in with proprietary file formats and apps. Facebook, they play lock-in on the easiest setting because we do the lock-in for them. Through something economists call the collective action problem, which is like how economists describe the fact that you love your friends, but they're a pain in the ass. So even though you're all ready to leave Facebook, you can't agree on when you should go or where you should go. And so you all stay because you love each other more than you hate Facebook. And so that collective action problem and the high switching costs of being denied the company, the people who matter to you on Facebook mean that you're stuck there. Once Facebook understands that, they understand that they can make things worse for you, not out of sadism, although some of them are probably sadist, but in order to make things better for business customers. And so advertisers pile in because now Facebook is spying on you and they're offering really low cost, high fidelity ad targeting with an extremely built out anti-ad fraud operation. So if you give them $1 to show an ad to a specific user, that user is getting that ad crammed in their face. And publishers cram in because Facebook tells them that if they post excerpts of their content with links back to their website, they'll stuff it into people's eyeballs, even though they never asked to see it, give them a free traffic funnel, let them monetize it as they see fit. And then those business customers, they get locked in. And I think that if you're someone who thinks of yourself as like an end user or consumer, it's really easy to lose track of how powerful a buyer can be instead of a seller. So a monopoly is about a powerful seller, right? We all know about that because we played the shitty board game at the cottage in the summer, right? But a monopsony is a powerful buyer. So imagine you own a coffee shop and next door there's an office building and 20% of your sales come from the people who work in that office building. And the company goes out of business and the next day you lose 20% of your sales. That could be like an extinction level event. Right? 20% drop off in overnight receipts. That's persistent. You're going to have to lay people off. You might have to get a bridge loan to keep paying the loans on your equipment. You might not make rent. Before you know it, you're out of business. Meanwhile, say you're a coffee drinker, right? There's 5 coffee shops on your block and one of them goes under. Okay, well, you shop somewhere else. right? Monopsonies are so much easier to get and maintain than monopolies. And once the buyer is structurally important to a firm, they can really squeeze the firm. So you have these business customers who are now locked into Facebook, advertisers, publishers. They're there because we're there. We're there because we're holding each other hostage. The advertisers and the publishers can't afford to leave. So Facebook phase 3 starts to squeeze them. For advertisers, they see ad fidelity dropping, ad prices going up, ad fraud explodes. So in 2017, Procter & Gamble dropped its $200 million per year surveillance advertising
That's the pharmaceutical
spending.
giant, right?
No, that's a different company. Procter & Gamble's a
Oh.
consumer packaged goods company. If you go to the grocery store,
shampoos and shit. Yeah.
well, and cakes and breads and canned goods.
I see.
Everything in your grocery store comes from, to a first approximation, either Unilever or Procter & Gamble. Like all the packaged goods come from one of two companies.
Two companies. So okay.
Procter & Gamble is one of them. So Procter & Gamble had been spending $200 million a year on surveillance ads, on what they call behavioral ads. And they dropped that to zero, and they saw a 0% drop in sales. Because to a first approximation, $200 million worth of ads was just going down the fraud hole, right? Publishers, meanwhile, are discovering that they have to post longer and longer excerpts of their content to Facebook just to be seen by the people who subscribed, let alone to be recommended. They're becoming more and more substitutive for their own website. And eventually it has to be the whole article. And what's worse, if you put a link back to your own website, well, Facebook downranks you because that link might be malicious. And so now you're just a commodity backend supplier to Facebook, and your only path to monetization is that corrupt advertising system. So this is the end of stage 3 of enshittification. Facebook has harvested all of the value. They have left a kind of homeopathic residue of things you've asked to see in your own feed. They've left a void that they filled with stuff that advertisers and publishers are paying to place in your feed. Those people are getting ripped off to the tunes of billions. They're not having a good time either. And then, final stage of enshittification, the platform's a giant pile of shit, but that's a very brittle equilibrium, right? The difference between, like, I hate this place, but I can't stop coming back, and I hate this place and I'm never coming back, it's very thin. And you get one like scandal, one Cambridge Analytica, one privacy breach, one live stream mass shooting, people both for the exits. And then the platform owners, they panic, and being tech bros, they call it pivoting. So Mark Zuckerberg gets out of his sarcophagus one morning and says, hearken to me, brothers and sisters, for I've had a vision in the night. It turns out the future is not as I told you, arguing with your racist uncle using the primitive text interface that I invented to non-consensually rate the fuckability of Harvard undergraduates. It is actually for me to convert you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character so I can imprison you in a virtual world I stole from a 25-year-old satirical cyberpunk novel that I call the metaverse, right? And that is the final stage of enshittification.
And how is that going for him?
Well, it lasted long enough to keep the stock market believing that maybe he could keep growing even after he dominated the sector. And then when they lost confidence that would be the way that he could keep growing, he said it was AI. And then when they lost confidence in AI, he said it was super intelligence. And, who knows what it's going to be next, right? Given the way Trump is going, it's probably going to be med beds, this imaginary technology that you lie in and fixes all of your illnesses. And Facebook's going to pivot to med bed.
By the way, speaking of AI, does it emergence, at least the way it's designed and utilized now, only accelerate this process of enshittification? Because it certainly seems like that to me.
So one of the things that AI is pretty good at is like doing minor variations to kind of edge people towards some state or another. So there's this thing called algorithmic wage discrimination. It's a term coined by the scholar Vina Dubel. She originally used it to describe how Uber pays its drivers. So Uber will periodically lowball a driver by just a little bit, offering them a little bit less per mile or per minute than they would normally get. And if the driver accepts the ride, then that's the new normal. And then they start to lowball them again. So they're just tightering the dose down a little bit in these small random increments. And the idea is, like, if you're picky as a driver, it's because you've got a side hustle, right? You've got something else that lets you be selective. But if Uber can like trap you in this lowering wage, then maybe whatever it is you used to do, you can't do anymore. And so now you're dependent on Uber. So that's the thing that these things are really good at. This is even worse when it's applied to other labor markets. So preferentially in the United States, hospitals source their nurses as contract workers. They want to do union avoidance. So they don't want to hire staff nurses. So they understaff the wards and then they hire day nurses. And these day nurses, they used to get their work through staffing agencies, and there'd be a few in every town. And these days, those have all been replaced by 4 giant apps, each of which calls itself Uber for nursing. And just like Uber, they try to do algorithmic wage discrimination. So like I said, we haven't had a new privacy law in this country since 1988 with the Video Privacy Protection Act. And so we have this totally unregulated data broker sector, and they will sell anyone any information about anyone. So the way that these nursing apps work is before you're offered a shift, the app will go and connect to a data broker and look up your credit. And if you're carrying a lot of credit card debt, and especially if it's delinquent, you get offered a lower wage, right? Because you're probably more economically desperate. What that means is that the nurse who's inserting your catheter probably drove Uber till midnight the night before and then skipped breakfast to make rent because their wages are being forced down, right? And so keeping people in that desperation equilibrium, it's the kind of thing that you can automate well with technologies that these days we call AI. A few years ago we called machine learning. It's just, it's a pretty straightforward algorithm, but it's like the kind of thing that AI is pretty good at. Mostly, I'm not as worried about AI as a technology because it's such a disgusting investment bubble that is going to burst and take the economy with it. 31% of the S&P 500 is 7 AI companies, none of which are profitable, all of which are hundreds of billions of dollars into capex they will never recoup on, all of which are losing billions of dollars a year. That when that
But aren't
market,
they? Sorry to interrupt. But aren't they saying that Uber is still not profitable after all these years?
Depends on who you ask. I mean, Uber's found some profit. So what Uber did for a lot of years, so Uber, the way that Uber got lock-in was the Saudi royal family gave them $31 billion, which they funneled through Masayoshi Son's and WeWork, or not WeWork, SoftBank, which funded WeWork and Uber, is funding OpenAI, was funding Yahoo in the years when it bought every promising Web 2.0 startup and then killed it. This guy's like a menace. And so Masayoshi Son gives $31 billion in Saudi royal money to Uber. Uber loses 41 cents on the dollar for 13 years. Because they are charging so much less for rides than it costs to provide them. Cities start to underinvest in transit because why would you ride the bus when you get an Uber so cheaply? And all the other cab companies go out of business. And so now in most places, it's just Uber and Lyft. And so they have this gigantic lock-in. And so the question was always, well, can Uber eventually make money? So for a long time, they relied on these weird accounting tricks. Like they would say, okay, well, we entered all these other markets, like we went into China and Indonesia and India and Japan and whatever, and we started these companies, and they were all unsuccessful. So we sold them to other unsuccessful competitors. So like Didi bought Uber China, right? Now, those companies, they're also not public, but we are now holding a bunch of their non-public, non-liquid stock. And this year, we think that stock has doubled in price. Not because anyone's buying it or selling it. It is illiquid. It's a private company. But we are going to book that as $11 billion in revenue on for this year, right? So they're just like making up numbers. This is how WeWork operated too. They just made up numbers and added them to their balance sheet. More recently, because Uber has doubled the price of rides and halved the price of driver compensation on average by playing these games with pricing where, they'll do to you what they do to drivers, where periodically they'll charge you more. And if you accept the ride, they'll charge you more again next time and next time. They're trying to find the equilibrium of your willingness to pay. And they're using behavioral cues. At one point, there was an Uber executive who said that they were using whether your battery was about to die to raise prices. They later walked that claim back. I don't know if it's true or not. One of the things about Uber's app, like all apps, is that because it is locked up, because it has a digital lock around it, what if you're a gamer, you might call digital rights management, it's illegal to reverse engineer it and try and look inside and see how it works. Because in 1998, Bill Clinton signed a law that bans reverse engineering where there's DRM involved. And so we can't really study how Uber works. We can only make indirect observations. So there's people like the rideshare guy who's got a popular YouTube channel who will get a bunch of Uber drivers in a room who all have different degrees of how often they drive and what kind of rides they accept. And all of them will get a page for the same ride, and they'll show their phones, and you can see the range of compensation and offer. Most of us don't do that as riders, but I bet if you did it as a rider, you'd find the same thing. So there's a possibility that Uber is now profitable. It's inched into profitability by squeezing riders and drivers so very hard.
Before I interrupted you, you said that the AI sector is a massive bubble right now.
Yeah. So I don't think I think those foundation models are not long for this world. I think the only reason they exist is because other people are giving AI grifters billions of dollars to keep the lights on at the data centers. And those people are going to expect a return on their investment. And when the market craters, they're going to pull out if they don't lose it all. And I think most of those servers will just be shut off. I think the foundation models are doomed. If you want to plan for the future of AI, I think you should plan for what you would do if you could buy GPUs at 10 cents on the dollar, hire a lot of unemployed applied statisticians, and optimize open source models that have barely been touched yet in terms of optimization and have lots of room for improvement. That's the future of AI. And it'll be a bunch of like marginally useful utilities that are kind of cool. Like I have a local model on my computer. I have this spreadsheet I have to parse once every 3 months of sales that I have to break out in this very specific way that's really hard. And it takes me 4 hours. And I broke it down. I did it yesterday because it was the first day of the quarter. We're recording this on October 2nd. So it was October 1st yesterday. And I used a model running locally on my computer, Llama, and I just broke it down with Llama. And I broke it down one step at a time so I could check the numbers at each step. It took me half an hour, right? That's going to be like a really useful thing. You don't have to pay for it. Llama's free, right? And it'll get faster and better with more open source hacking. So it's not a business. It's a consumer surplus.
Back to my experience on the shitty internet these days. Why do all of these companies want us to download an app instead of just using a website? For example, if I want to have a look at the time, they're literally making me have to download some clunky fucking app where I have to sign up with my complete biography as well as surrender my mother's maiden name or something before they
and click through a license agreement. Yeah,
exactly. Of course, before they let me have a look at the dial. Jesus Christ, why is that happening?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier this law, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that Bill Clinton signed in 1998, which makes it a crime to break DRM, punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. And
sorry, break the RM for us, the illiterate.
So,
what does that mean?
If there's any kind of digital lock on a service, so if you have a program that's open, that doesn't have any access controls, that tries to stop people from changing how it works, like, a browser like Firefox, say, right? Then anyone can modify how it works. So like there's ad blockers for browsers. 51% of all web users have installed an ad blocker. It's the largest consumer boycott in human history. And, that is possible because the browser is open. If the browser were closed, if they had done something to try and stop you from modifying it, and you went and you broke that, you opened the lock, that is a crime, even if the thing that you're doing is legal. So even if you just want to block ads or protect your privacy. So an app is just a website skinned in the right kind of IP to make it a felony to protect your privacy while you use it. And any kind of modification to an app is illegal because you have to break the DRM, the digital rights management, the digital lock, in order to get at it. And this is why firms really like apps, because if you're using an app, you can't like install another app, a counter app that checks its math or refuses lowball offers or uploads the stuff that you've seen to a central repository so other people can compare the offers they're getting to the offers you're getting, or any other things you might do to defend yourself. As a worker, you might say, well, I'm going to install an app along with all the other workers that I know that are going to refuse any kind of lowball offers from the gig work platform, that is going to monitor, say, 7 gig work platforms and see which one is paying the most at any given moment, breaking down by mile, by estimated time, and so on. That lets me get the most out of the platform. That lets me defend my interests at the expense of the shareholders of the company that made the tool.
By the way, in a recent talk you gave for, I believe, CloudFest, you said Enshitification is a result of specific policy choices, which means we can reverse those choices. At the moment, though, it doesn't really seem like we're going that way. The infamous photo of these extremely charismatic big tech gentlemen from Zuck to Bezos swarming Trump at his inauguration seems to prove that rather than the state taming the tech giants have pretty much captured the state.
I think that's true. I mean, we've had this antitrust resurgence that started under Trump 1. We kind of forget that, the case against Google and Facebook started under Trump 1. And it was not clear exactly why Trump did that. Some of it was just capriciousness. Some of it was petty grievance. But the thing is that around the time Trump was bringing those antitrust cases, we were seeing an antitrust resurgence in Australia, in Japan and South Korea, in the EU, in Canada, where I'm from, in the United Kingdom, and also in China, right, where there's been pretty vigorous antitrust against tech companies. No one really has a theory about why that was all happening and why it's continued to happen, because while it's slowed down in the US, and Trump, to the extent he's doing antitrust right now, is attacking companies that displease him, which are companies that are guilty, right? They've done bad things. Every major company is an antitrust violator, but he's not going after them because they violated the law. He hasn't sorted his list by the companies that hurt Americans the most. He's sorted his list by the companies that make him the most angry personally. But all around the world, we've seen this surge in antitrust. And if you're a political scientist, this is a mystery, because it is a bedrock of political science theory that the preferences of billionaires are the ultimate determinant of our policy. Things that billionaires want happen. Things that billionaires reject do not. And it doesn't matter how popular or unpopular they are with the rest of us. There's a big empirical study, Princeton study, that analyzed thousands of policy outcomes and came to this conclusion that public policy preferences have no bearing on policy outcomes when they conflict with billionaires' policy preferences. And yet here we are, right? The single most important pro-billionaire policy we have is monopoly. I mean, monopoly is the concentration of power and wealth. So of course it shits out billionaires at the rate of knots, right? So we now have this anti-monopoly surge all around the world. It's like gravity has reversed itself, like pigs have started flying, like water has started flowing uphill. And it's still going on without Trump. And in some ways, the fact that Trump is such an isolationist is to the benefit of other efforts to resist American tech giants. In the European Union, they're pursuing this thing called Eurostack, where they just want to get the hell off of American platforms. And it's not because of patriotism. It's because Trump has weaponized U.S. platforms to attack European institutions. So, for example, when the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court brought charges against Benjamin Netanyahu for genocide, that chief prosecutor's Outlook account was killed. They lost all their email, all their documents, all their files that they used for these legal cases. And when Microsoft was asked by European governments to make privacy guarantees, they said, we cannot promise you that we will not share government and corporate data on Microsoft servers belonging to Europeans with the US government, even if it's on European servers. And we cannot promise you we'll tell you if we're doing it. And so you have Europe being really interested in getting the hell off of the American tech stacks. And the biggest impediment to that is that it's illegal in Europe to circumvent, to jailbreak, to break DRM. And it's because in 2001, the US Trade Representative convinced the European Union to pass a law just like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. In fact, that is something the U.S. Trade Representative has done to all of America's trading partners. So, if you're an American, the fact that these companies rip off all their users, including their American users, may be beneficial to you because at least it's propping up the stock market. Maybe you've got a 401k. But if you're a foreigner, you don't even get that benefit. You just get ripped off. And so to keep that ripoff going, to keep the most profitable lines of business of the most profitable companies in the S&P 500 alive, the U.S. Trade Representative has forced every American trading partner to agree not to develop technology that would be wildly profitable and save money for the people who live in those countries, like an alternative app store, an alternative firmware for printers or for cars or for tractors. They'll let you use generics or get generic service. And that was all under the threat of tariffs. But a deterrent only works to the extent that you don't use it, right? If you say, I'm going to burn your house down unless you do what I tell you. Well, once you've burned my house down, why should I do what you tell me? And so now that we are living with tariffs, why would we continue everywhere in the world to toe the line on, the American priorities for tech policy? And so we've seen some very muscular antitrust coming out of the EU. So
really?
Much so
Could you give us a couple of examples? Because
Sure.
from where I'm sitting, I just see these guys getting more powerful by the day. So some good news would be nice.
there's something called the Digital Markets Act. It's a big, gnarly hairball of a law. It's got some pretty cool features. So you may know about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, the privacy law in Europe. It has been pretty much a catastrophe. It was enacted 9 years ago. And it says that you just can't spy on people unless you have their permission. And if you ask their permission and they ignore you, you just have to let them keep going. You can't just like throw up a cookie consent dialogue that says, do you want to use cookies? Yes, no, show me choices, blah, blah, blah. And then just make them go through like 11 clicks to avoid the cookies, or just have them say, yes, I accept all the cookies. That's illegal. The problem is that the GDPR was structured so that the cases under GDPR would be heard in the courts of the member state where the company was headquartered. So if it was an Irish company, it would be heard by the Irish Data Commissioner. If it was a German company, it'd be heard by the German Data Commissioner, and so on and so on. So all the tech companies in Europe pretend that they're Irish because Ireland is a tax haven. And so if they pretend they're Irish, then their money floats in a state of untaxable grace somewhere in the Irish Sea. And what that means is that Ireland has to keep these companies happy. Because if you're Apple and you can pay enough lawyers to pretend that you're Irish this week, next week you could pretend you're Cypriot or Maltese or Dutch or Luxembourgian. And so they don't enforce any laws against companies in Ireland, not just tax laws, because they don't want these companies to go. So when GDPR cases went to Ireland, as these tech companies violated the hell out of the GDPR, they just died there. The Irish data regulator barely gets out of bed. And when he does, he sits around in his underwear all day eating breakfast cereal and watching cartoons. And so it took 9 years to move some of these cases to the federal courts where they're finally being heard. But under the Digital Markets Act, all these cases are just going to start in the federal courts. So they're going to bypass the Irish court. So it's a very procedural thing, but it basically means that within a year, we should probably just have the end of spying on users in Europe and the end of these bullshit cookie consent dialogues. That's huge, right? Because a lot of this stuff is just downstream of spying on people. There's another piece of this that I'm really excited about. It's the interoperability mandates. And it says that companies cannot block third parties that want to plug into their services. So if you have an instant messaging...
tweak it again. If you don't want to tweak it again. That interoperability means if you want to tweak something again, right? That's what we were talking about before.
Yeah, if you want to plug one thing into something else, if you want to use someone else's shoelaces in your shoes, someone's gas in your gas tank, someone's light bulb in your light socket. So what they're saying is you can't block people from plugging their own instant messaging into, say, WhatsApp. So you'll be able to send messages from WhatsApp to other kinds of services and back again, right? And what they've said is, in particular, you can't block third-party app stores and third-party payment processors. So Google and Apple make 30 cents on every dollar that's collected through the App Store. Not just the money you spend buying something, but the money you spend buying an app, but the money you spend every month on your subscription, the money you spend every month when you buy something, when you buy a digital asset, when you buy an album on Bandcamp. 30 cents out of every dollar is going to Apple and Google to process that transaction. Now, the actual cost of processing a transaction in the European Union is between 0 and 1%. So depending on whether you pick the 0 number or the 1 number, it's either a 1∞% markup or a 3,000% markup. But it's a big goddamn markup. It's worth $100 billion to Apple alone. This is also something the major console vendors do. So this is PlayStation and Xbox, Nintendo are also taking 30 cents out of every dollar. Steam is taking 30 cents out of every dollar. And so this is just an economy-wide tax that's being levied by these middlemen. And so what the DMA says is you can't stop people from adding their own app store to their device. And you can't stop vendors, right? People who sell stuff through your app store from choosing their own payment processor. So if you sign up for Patreon through the app store, Apple doesn't get to process the Patreon payments. Patreon does, and they can find someone who charges 1% and not 30% to do that payment processing. And so Apple is so pissed off about this that they threatened last week to stop selling phones in Europe, which is a hilarious threat to make, given that there's 500 million affluent consumers in Europe. It's just the most transparently stupid, unrealistic threat. And indeed, a day after they made it, they were like, oh no, you misunderstood us. We're not going to stop selling phones in Europe. That would be nuts. But they definitely said they were going to stop selling phones in Europe. They're really angry about this, which is great. They're making the right people angry.
What do you think is driving this wave of antitrust activity all of a sudden? Because we did speak about like state capture by billionaires before. So this is pretty remarkable if it truly is happening.
Yeah, so I think some of it is that it is the coalescence of a widespread rage at concentrated power and wealth and the corrupting influence it has on our society. It's not coherent yet. People don't know that that's what they're angry about. They think they're angry about the climate emergency or xenophobia and racism or the falling standard of living or, naked corruption. But those things are all downstream of concentrated power and wealth. And so I think there's just a kind of political tailwind for this stuff. I also think that there's a fair bit of billionaire on trillionaire violence. So, you have people like
Never
Daniel.
heard that before.
Sure,
like
yeah. You have like Daniel Ek, right, who started Spotify, who's furious that Apple's taking 30 cents out of every dollar. So he's bringing antitrust cases in Europe. Right, you have the Epic Games who make Fortnite doing the same thing in America. Right, they're really pissed off about this stuff, and you have like the telcos being really angry at the internet companies because they're like, well, we want to end net neutrality and charge rent if YouTube wants to show a video to someone. We want them to cut us in for a piece of it, not just the money Google spends every month on its lines, but like a share of all the revenue they make from the lines. Right, no honor among thieves. So this, I think, contributed to the inertia. And I think that this weird coalition of very rich people who are angry at obscenely rich people and everyday people who are angry at all of them has created a momentum that's just very hard to stop. Antitrust action has been especially vibrant in China, which is not a place you think of as being angry at its giant tech companies. Those are typically seen as partners with the Chinese state. Certainly that's the story Facebook has told for more than a decade. Wherever there was any kind of rumblings of antitrust action against Facebook, they'd say, are you crazy? We're, quote, defending European cyberspace from Chinese communism. Right? But it's pretty clear that China doesn't think that they're exporting Chinese communism with tech companies. They think those tech companies are a competitor of theirs for power, not an arm of the Chinese state. Xi Jinping is rounding up Chinese tech bosses and sticking them in gulags. And so, there's this, maybe also this sense that the prerogatives of lawmakers have been usurped by firms and they're getting pretty sick of it too. I mean, you got to figure being a Congress jerk sucks, right? Like you have to spend 4 hours a day calling donors, right? Because if you don't do it, your competitor who is doing it is going to win your seat away from you. And then these guys call you up and demand that you take the most ridiculous stands, and you can't get anything done and everyone hates you and you go to town halls and they throw tomatoes at you. I mean, I think that there is just generally a kind of fed upness. There's a saying in finance, Stein's law, that anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. And I think we've reached kind of the Stein's law singularity here.
What comes after total degradation, after the last phase of Enshitification then?
Well, ideally, the company would fail, right? That's what happened to MySpace.
From
right?
your mouth to God's ears. Yeah, for a lot of these guys.
They just died. And that's what you would like to see happen. I'm not like the world's biggest believer in markets or anything, but to the extent that markets do anything useful, they like do what fire does. They clean out the dead wood and, they punish bad companies and elevate good companies. And when the good companies decide to get bad, they punish them too. Right. So the thing that stopped these firms from failing is lock-in. And this is the most underappreciated aspect of what's going on with these platforms. It is really hard to convince your friends to leave a platform because they're not just there for you.
I'm still on Facebook and I fucking hate that place.
Oh, everybody
like you said,
hates
it's just like old aunts spreading anti-vax conspiracies now. But I'm still there. I don't even know why.
If you're there and there's like 200 people you're connected to, some of them are there because they have a rare disease and that's the only place they can talk to other people who have the same disease, or they're there because they emigrated from another country and that's how they stay in touch with the people back home, or they're there because that's where their customers or their audience is, or it's how they organize the carpool for their kids' little league, then you don't just have to convince the friends that you have to go. You have to convince all those other people to go, and they all have their people who have to go. But if you switch phone numbers, if you go from T-Mobile to Verizon, you don't have to convince everyone who used to call you on T-Mobile to get a Verizon SIM. Your number just moves over. And that's because of interoperability. We could mandate or allow for reverse engineering to create systems of portability between social media services. If you use the new federated open source version of Twitter called Mastodon, it's a Twitter competitor. It's got a lot of different servers, right? So it's like email where there's you can sign up with Google, you can sign up with Outlook, you can have a friend who's got a mail server at a data center in their garage, you can sign up with them, and everyone can send email to everyone and receive email from everyone. That's how Mastodon works. And it can be a little intimidating when you join Mastodon because you're like, well, which server should I join? There's hundreds of them. But actually, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't like the server you're on, if you think that it's badly managed, badly moderated, if you're getting harassed there, if you're getting if you're getting a bad vibe, with one click you can export a file that has everyone who follows you and everyone you follow, and you upload that file to a new server, and everyone just follows you over. The same way you can change your phone number and everyone follows you over. And it's kind of weird to even note which server you're on. It's kind of like calling up a friend and saying, hey, buddy, you wouldn't believe whose SIM is in my phone today. Who gives a damn, right? There's already people working on interoperability between Bluesky and Mastodon, but the real holy grail will be letting people leave Facebook, leave Twitter, and still be in touch with the people that they left behind so that they don't have to face these switching costs. Same with Amazon, right? It's really hard to get off Amazon because Amazon has pushed all the merchants out of your neighborhood. There's very few things you can buy without going to Amazon. And of course, people don't open stores because everyone in the neighborhood shops on Amazon. But every item on Amazon has a unique identifier called an ASIN, which you see in the URL. If you look at an Amazon URL, there's a 8 or 9 digit number in there. Well, there's only 2 or 3 massive inventory point of sale systems in the country that anyone uses. We could map those ASINs onto standard UPC barcodes for all kinds of products. And you could have neighborhood cooperative ventures that just listed the inventory of all the stores in your neighborhood. And if you were looking at something on Amazon that was for sale at a merchant in your neighborhood, it could replace the buy now button with a buy now at the corner store button. And, in that way, you wouldn't have to choose between not having something and shopping locally. Every time there was a chance to shop locally, you could buy it locally. And you could get neighborhood level aggregated statistics that would tell merchants what people were buying on Amazon that wasn't for sale in their stores so that they could start to stock it too. So this is a way that you can incrementally move people out of these platforms and strip them of the power that they derive from lock-in, the power to make things worse with the secure knowledge that you're not going to go anywhere else. Or, think of Uber, right? Uber's got this powerful network effect. For every driver who's driving Uber, that's another reason for a passenger to pick up the Uber app because there's more cars on the road with Uber. So if you start a co-op of drivers, drivers aren't going to install it because riders don't have it. And riders aren't going to install it because drivers don't have it. But imagine if you had another app on your phone, one that watched the Uber app, right? One that violated Section 12.1 of the DMCA. And when you set up a ride with a driver, it would make a little fingerprint of that ride and stick it on a server and check to see whether a matching fingerprint had been made by a driver anywhere in the system. And if a driver and a rider could discover that they'd both set up a ride with Uber, but they both also have the co-op app, they could tear down the Uber ride and rebuild it as a co-op ride. So there'd never be a reason not to use Uber, and there'd also never be a reason not to use the co-op app. Right, that you would get the best of all worlds in this way. Now, all of this is not only technologically possible, it's a good business, right? Someone could make a shit ton of money selling this stuff. The only reason we don't do it is because there are laws that prevent firms from competing with dominant actors. And again, I'm not the world's biggest market true fan, but if you believe in free markets, this is a thing that should really upset you.
What do you think of the concept of technofeudalism from Yanis Varoufakis. So some sort of a repeat of the good old Dark Ages days, only with the big tech companies replacing feudal lords. And instead of physical land, they control all of our digital spaces, data, and online markets. Think
Yeah,
that's a valid concept to
I
describe things
really
as they
do.
are?
Yeah, I think, there multiple people have used the term techno-feudalism to describe different things. It's such an easy coinage. So Bruce Schneier uses it in a slightly different sense, but I think Giannis's sense is really good. He, is drawing a distinction between two kinds of income, profits and rents. So profits are things you get from making things that people buy, and rents are things that you get from owning something that people need to make a profit. So if you own the building the coffee shop is in, you get rent. Meanwhile, the person who owns the coffee shop is getting a profit by combining capital like espresso machines with alienated labor from baristas, right? And the interesting thing about profits and rents is that rents are to a large extent insulated from competitive risk. So if you own the building the coffee shop is in, and the coffee shop goes under because there's a brand new coffee shop across the street and it's poached all the best baristas and all the most ardent customers, and now you've got an empty storefront. If you're the landlord, that's great news, because now you've got an empty storefront on a block with a really hot coffee shop and you can rent it out again. Meanwhile, the entrepreneur, right, the profit seeker who owned the coffee shop, they're out of luck. So every capitalist aspires to being a landlord, right? They don't want to make profits. They want to make rents because they want to be insulated. They want to, Doug Rushkoff calls it going meta. So, don't drive a cab, own a medallion. Don't own a medallion, make an app. Don't make an app, found an app company. Don't found an app company, invest in an app company. Don't invest in an app company, buy options in an app company, right? So get as far as you can, as insulated as you can. And it's not just a fetish for abstraction. It's each layer of this is insulated from risk, right? Obviously, the cab driver is exposed to the most risk. But as we saw with Uber, medallion owners are exposed to risk too. But, as we saw with a bunch of companies that competed with Uber that went under, the app company can be exposed to risk. So at each level, you are cabining off your risk. Right. And so this is a way of shoving risk off onto other participants in the market. Usually shit flows downhill. So you're shoving risk onto workers and people who are more disadvantaged. The great poets of capitalism, people like Adam Smith and Ricardo, they were not, when they said free markets, they were not advocating for markets free of regulation. They were arguing for markets free of rents. They said rents were the biggest risk to profit. And they acknowledged that all profit makers would rather be rent takers. And they saw the role of the state in intervening. Smith wrote, "Seldom do men of commerce gather that the conversation does not turn to a conspiracy to raise prices." Right. So, these you tell this to people who consider themselves capitalists today. You read quotes from Adam Smith at them, including people from the Adam Smith Institute, and they'll look at you like you're a Trotskyist.
They can't be happy about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Varoufakis's point is that many of the factors of production are now owned by tech companies. They own the data centers, they own the marketplaces, they own the platforms, and they make most of their money from rent, not from profit. So Amazon takes 45 to 51 cents out of every dollar that its sellers make. They make so much money charging sellers to access Prime that Prime costs Amazon nothing, right? That when they ship a parcel, like when Amazon sells you something that is in Amazon's inventory and not a third-party merchant's inventory, it costs them nothing to ship it. It's been fully subsidized by companies that are its competitors, right? So this is just pure rents. And I think what Varoufakis is trying to do here, in addition to being quite usefully analytical, is he's trying to find a coalition, right? He's trying to say, look, if you are a capitalist, you should hate these rentiers, right? Because they are getting in the way of your ability to make a living. You can be Daniel Ek, right? You can be a music monopolist who is screwing every musician on earth, and you are still getting fucked by Apple and Google, right? So how do you avoid this rent seeking? Well, you have to end feudalism. You have to end techno-feudalism.
Cory, last question, very, very quickly. Is a new, better internet possible, or is that just a pipe dream in 2025? And if we're being pragmatic, what can we do to accelerate this right now? Because I imagine holding a placard saying Peter Thiel sucks won't really do much.
Well, I think a new, better internet is definitely possible. Overcoming structural impediments to better infrastructure is something that we've been doing since the Gilded Age. Our ancestors broke up Standard Oil and defeated John D. Rockefeller. They weren't smarter than we were. They weren't more powerful than we were. They didn't have access to lost knowledge. It's not like we're trying to recover the secret of building pyramids without power tools, right? We know how to do this stuff. And right now, all over the world, there is far more interest in doing this than there was even a year ago, because people want to get the hell away from Trump. And so, Trump has been a weird mixed blessing here. Life gives you SARS, you make sarsaparilla. But I really do think that we're having a moment everywhere that's not America for thinking about what the internet looks like if you don't allow American tech companies to screw you. And if you incubate your own domestic tech sector and launch it into a stable orbit by raiding the massive rents acquired by these American tech giants. So I don't think it's a pipe dream at all. I think that it's absolutely within our grasp, and I think it's quite necessary. Because, the internet is the platform we're going to organize to resist genocide and the climate emergency, xenophobia and fascism on, right? I grew up as a young activist riding a bicycle around the streets of Toronto, wheat pasting posters to telephone poles. If you think you can get people out for a mass demonstration without social media, without email, without other organizing tools, you need to spend a couple of nights out in sub-zero weather sticking these posters up, and then tell me what you think.
Cory, thank you so much for your time. This was amazing.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow and rate on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also hype videos on YouTube now. Marketing tutorials insist. It's really important that I keep harping on and hassle you about that, so I'm doing it. Also, if you'd like to, please support me on Patreon. Again, this is a one-person podcast. I do everything by my little old self. There's no team behind me, but you can help by hopping on Patreon and finding the Smart Cookies podcast on there. And then last but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons. Tovarishin Tovarishice, without you there would be no Smart Cookies, which makes you actual producers of this show. So eternal thanks goes to Delen Mia, Chert Gosar, Sasha Sodia, Richard, Amy Jons, Mattia Renchel, Florian Hawa, Peter Karba, Mattia Zupancic, Dejan Žolnir, Darej, Rok Tržan, Sasha Vipotnik, Neven Cvjanović, Juš Premrov, Sirkezi, Goran Ivašić, Anže Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaš Mahar, Štrole, Ajda Macian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordan, Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Taichi. That's a long list, and I'm super, super grateful that it's getting longer. I'm deeply touched. Thanks again for all your support. Bye-bye.